Charleston celebrates its 350th anniversary this year, and to commemorate that, Charleston Pirate Tours brings you Charleston History Highlights. Hi, Eric of Charleston Pirate Tours. Remember earlier we talked about the building, the Tavern. Well, let me tell you another story about the Tavern that Gary shared with me a long time ago. Gary told me that right after he and his wife bought this building, he said it didn't matter if his wife was here, it didn't matter if he had a customer here. He knew that he was never alone in this building. He said there was something going on in the apartment over his head. He said even though nobody was living up there, he would hear footsteps over his head all day long. And he finally figured out that whoever this ghost possibly was had run of the place, because every night when Gary would leave to go home, before he'd lock up, he'd make sure every bottle was perfectly straight on the shelves and everything looked perfect for the next day of business. And he'd lock up and leave. He said some days I'd come back in the next morning, find bottles turned around backwards on the shelves, bottles misplaced and in the floor. He said it was just crazy. So he had no idea who this ghost was. He just simply referred to him as Willie the Ghost. But Gary's a lot like me. He's curious to a fault. I mean, I'm 65. I saw my first ghost when I was 10, so I love running down ghost stories, and he's sort of the same way. And he was determined to find out what it was. So he found out that in 1886, there was a guy that lived in the apartment upstairs by the name of Johann Clausen. But Johann met a tragic end. One morning in September, about 4:30 a.m., two police officers walking a beat found a man lying here on the sidewalk in his nightshirt with his head cracked open and two men standing over him. Well, the police ran up to the scene, tried to grab these guys to find out what had happened, and they ran off into the dark. Well, here lays Johann Clausen dead on the sidewalk. So they go upstairs to look around. They see a few things out of place, but the only thing that stood out was an open window. Did he jump out? Did he fall out? Was he thrown out? Couldn't really tell. They write up the report, and Gary actually found the police report of the officers that investigated this. Well, maybe that's his ghost. Maybe it's Johann. Just before Gary retired and sold the business, he was sitting in here one day and a young lady came through the door carrying a briefcase. Now his assumption is the lady's coming in his establishment carrying a briefcase. She's trying to sell something. She said, "Is this 120 East Bay Street?" He said, "Yes, it is." She said, "Well, maybe you can help me with something." And she introduced herself to Gary and said that she was the great-great-granddaughter of Johann Clausen. Apparently this young lady was tracing her family's genealogy and had traced every member of her family from the time that her great-great-grandmother arrived here from Norway all the way up to her. But there was a gap, a blank spot, where the great-great-grandfather would have been. And she said, all I can tell you is I have these old letters, and she pulled them out of the briefcase, explaining in these letters that he had moved here from Norway, left the wife and child behind, and he had moved over here to get established in business. Now, he became what's known as the bookkeeper and took care of the business for many of the shipping companies around here. He was a brilliant man, could fluently speak several languages, communicating with these people coming in on ships, and was quite successful. So the last letter he wrote his wife said, "I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm living in an apartment over a store at 120 East Bay Street. Pack up and let's go. Move on over here. We'll have a great life." And she told Gary, "I'm living proof she came, and I can show you the day she arrived. But I don't know what happened to my great-great-grandfather." And Gary said, "Well, hold on, I think I can help you." And he pulled out the police report and shared it with her. Well, that solved the mystery. She found out he died tragically, but at least now she knew what had happened. And she was thrilled to get that information. Well, after another short visit, she left and Gary locks up and goes home. The next morning as Gary's coming in, he steps up on the stoop over there, unlocking the door, took a quick glance down the street, and lo and behold, that lady was back sitting here on a bench that used to be right here. He said, well, I see you came back. Is there something else you want to talk about? And she said, well, I only need a minute of your time today because I've got to catch a plane and go home, but I wanted to come by. He said, well, come on in. So he invites her in, and she thanked him for all of his help from the day before. She was just thrilled that she got this information, but she said, you know, it really bothers me to think that the spirit of my great-great-grandfather might still be haunting this place. Why hasn't he moved on? Why would he still be here? Perhaps it's because he doesn't know how well things worked out with the family, and I'd like him to know. She said, I sat down this morning over breakfast and I wrote 2 letters to him. I wrote one in English and one in Norwegian. And if it's possible, I like to read them to him, assuming that he's listening. So Gary made a quick phone call within a matter of a few minutes. They're in this room right up here. And Gary stood in the corner and watched and listened as she read those 2 letters out loud, explaining who she was, how everything worked out so well in the family, all the way up to her. And after she was done, she thanked Gary, folded the letters and left them on a table that was up there. And she left. And Gary said, I never saw her again. But we've never heard another peep out of Johann. He's gone. So there's your ghost story with a real happy ending. We've since come to find out that Johann may have had a little company haunting this place. That'll be for another time and another story. I'm Eric with Charleston Pirate Tours. Happy birthday, Charleston.